What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Rams Brothers. I'm your host, Dean, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother and the other fantastic host of this show, Nick. And Nick, we're like 4 days away from training camp. The 2023 season is starting. We've had a ton of really good off-season content to keep us occupied. But first and most importantly, how are you, my good brother?
I'm great. You know, the dog days of summer have been rough, but luckily we have that amazing Netflix show, Quarterback, that we were talking about right before we started here, which has filled the football-sized hole in my heart. So that's been great. We got Hard Knocks coming up, which is going to be amazing with Aaron Rodgers. I think this Netflix Quarterback show is probably the best produced football content outside of football. Honestly, this beats any season of Hard Knocks I've ever seen.
I would put Behind the Grind, I would put Quarterbacks, and I would put Playcallers. Obviously, Jourdan Rodrigue's fantastic podcast. I would put the three of those, obviously. We put the three of those at the very top in consideration of best off-season content we've ever seen, right? Because obviously there's an evolution of content that's coming out that stems from Hard Knocks and everything that they created from an internal perspective. But then like just the production level, the quality of camera, the attention to detail, like everything is fully available now. It's Netflix, it's HBO, it's The Athletic, it's everything that has made itself available over the past couple of years. And I feel like it just strengthens everything that you need to know about your team in the offseason going into the regular season. And every single little detail in between, I feel like I learned more about the Rams, over the last 5-6 years within the last couple of months than I have, over an extended period of time, just because the content is so specifically focused on that offensive evolution and how everything has changed year to year to year with the play callers and with different teams and different schemes. And it's very, very interesting to observe. So we're off to a great start so far for 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we talk about what, the proposed topic of this episode, which is the perfect Sean McVay games, I think it's worth noting, to get it out of the way, the Rams are not releasing a new uniform this year. They pushed it to 2025, which is why I'm repping the bone hat, which I think has been the coolest thing from the rebrand, is the bone jerseys, the bone color. You don't see anything else like that across the entire NFL. And it means we're forced, kind of in a way, to have more bone representation, like bone jerseys and stuff. So I think it's great. And so many teams are terrified to release anything new. So many, the Saints, the Jets, the Cardinals, the Eagles, now the Colts, black helmet. It's like, let's just do a black helmet. And that's the only thing that changed, nothing else, just release a black helmet. And it's like, it's already a cliche. The Rams are sticking to what they have. They cemented the new legacy with a Super Bowl win. So the new era with the new logo, it's completely great. You don't have to change anything. I'm fine with them not releasing anything, and I love the bone. So,
yeah, we'll talk about it at the end of 2024, right? It'll tie a bow. I think you said everything that I would have wanted to say about the uniforms. We'll tie a bow on the topic, and we'll talk about it in a couple of years. It's something that's it's not important when you talk about the overall objective holistically with this team. When you want to be able to achieve things like getting a lot of salary cap off the book and introducing new concepts and a new scheme, and just a new methodology to all of these younger players. There's 44 rookies on the roster currently. It seems like the focus is very much shifting this team into a position where they can really get everything underneath of them, from a scheme, from a team, from just an overall player building perspective, relationship building, just getting everything together this year from top to bottom, and then making sure that they're better prepared to go into 2024 to go achieve that goal of winning a Super Bowl once again. But for the sake of this podcast and for the sake of some of the topics we're going to cover, talked about how we're going to cover Sean McVay's Perfect Games, which was inspired by obviously Jordan's podcast and a couple of other off-season hot topics that have popped up. But then also just kind of want to evaluate what's coming up with camp and some of the players that we feel like could be on the outskirts looking in, and some players that we may not necessarily feel like have a lock in terms of a position that they can rely on for 2024. So let's jump into the Sean McVay conversation, because, I think the offensive evolution year to year for Sean McVay has been something that needs to be studied. It's been something that's been replicated. It's been something that you need to game plan specifically against. And in 2017, you saw just strict 11 personnel. You get your best 11 players on the field and be able to run an offense that's tangible, that is efficient and is a dual threat consistently. And I feel like that's what they've been able to do over the past 2017, 18, and then, going into 2021 and 22. But, when you look at it, I think you just want to spend some time observing what was really, I guess, close to perfect or near perfect, and how we could potentially pick out a few things from each year and apply them to the offense in 2023 and 24 moving forward. Right. So I think there's a little piece in 2017, piece in 18, 19, 20, 21 that you could probably compile and apply towards your offense and make it a little bit more of a threat going into 2024 and 3. So
on Jourdan Rodrigue's podcast, which is a must listen, in my opinion. What's it called? I can't Playcallers. 5 episodes. Got to listen to all 5. I mean, it changes how you see like the coaching trees and like, the top of the league head coaches right now are all from this, like, McVay, the McDaniels and all that. Freaking
Zach Taylor and
Zach Taylor,
and
right.
Yep.
All of them. But Mike McDaniel said it best when he was like, it took anybody 2 years to kind of shut down the Rams from 2017 to 2018, where they were just lights out, greatest show on surf, as they were nicknamed kind of for a couple of years with the Goff Gurley regime. And we should just dive into some of these games, because trip down memory lane, some of these games are just like, the stuff you would see as a Rams fan, just couldn't believe it at the time, especially in 2017, when the year prior they had like 4 wins with Jeff Fisher.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think they went 0-7 with Jared Goff to finish the season, and I think they started off 3-1 under Case Keenum, and then lost out the entire rest of the season. That sounds like something that would happen under Jeff Fisher. But then you see photos like this, Nick. You see Robert Woods, you see Todd Gurley in the end zone. This photo is specific to the Robert Woods 3rd and 33 play that everybody remembers so well, the screen pass that he took to the house. There's so many memories. Like within that first season with the Rams, they destroyed the Giants on the road 51-17 in the regular season. Like they were 5-2 at the time, so they are obviously a good team. The Giants were only 1-6. They were still led by Eli Manning. I believe they still had Tom Coughlin in the building. So, I mean, you talk about just having to jump on a team that's at the end of a regime and a team that's up and coming, that you could tell a lot of good things are happening. You could tell the personnel strong enough to be able to potentially make a run towards the end of the season. I think the one thing that really stuck out to me was within like a 6 or 7 minute span, you had 20+ yard gainers from Todd Gurley, from Gerald Everett, from Robert Woods, from Sammy Watkins, from Tavon Austin. Like you're getting contribution from every single player that was on the offensive side of the ball. Every single skill player, you utilize them perfectly. And that's kind of what I was looking out for in these kind of situations. It was like schematically, how many things did you execute on? How many explosives? How many turnovers? Were there any mis-executions? Were there any drop touchdowns? Like how perfect was the game plan actually? And when you score 51 points on the road against an opponent that's not too talented, but in a season where you're 7 games into your livelihood as a head coach, you're still 30, 31 years old, kind of coming into your own, trying to teach this team how to come together and play together. And a lot of the good things that we heard from that Playcallers podcast, Nick, was Andrew Whitworth spoke to this really, really well. They allowed the players to kind of play within the scheme and kind of create things at the next level that would help every other player on the field. It wasn't necessarily dedicated to a specific play call from Sean McVay. There was a lot of flexibility and freedom and creativity within the offense. And I feel like this was kind of the first game. And there were other games earlier on in the season, but this game specifically really stood out as one that kind of reinvigorated the Rams' fan base. And what I felt like reinvigorated everything from top to bottom offensively with this Rams franchise.
Yeah. I mean, week 1, 2017, you and I were there against the Colts.
Yep.
In the Coliseum. I mean, they destroyed the Colts that year.
It felt too easy.
Curb stomped them. Yeah. And I remember just thinking oh, wow, this year's going to be fun. You know what I mean? Not really thinking oh yeah, we really got something here. But I think week 9 against the Giants, you're kind of seeing everything in full swing, everything that they can bring, they're bringing in in spades. And yeah, I mean, that was personally a favorite game of mine because a couple of my best friends are Giants fans. So I remember just pushing it down their throats.
Nick, it had been 13 years since you had any opportunity to talk any trash. They hadn't been in the playoffs since 2004. It was then 2017, and our first opportunity to potentially make the playoffs since we were children. So obviously,
I was in 4th grade.
It's a very exciting time for us to all kind of come together and root for a high-powered, explosive offense, which we hadn't seen in such a long time since the greatest show on turf. So then we bounce over to 2018, and I think we got a little bit of flack on Twitter for this decision. And it's, a lot of it is catered towards the fact that it's the 49ers. And it was, if you listen to the context within the podcast of the Playcallers, and you listen to some of the things that we're trying to bring to the table here in terms of how far ahead McVay was in the relationship between him and Kyle Shanahan, despite the fact that he was working under Kyle Shanahan for years and years before he eventually made his head coaching debut. So I just felt like the complexity behind that, the roster that he inhibited, but then turned into this schematic monster that you were just unable to stop in every single phase, whether it was the pass attack, it was deep crossers, whether it was the outside zone scheme, which then later developed into something else after, something that we'll allude to in a couple of minutes. But I just think that relationship and the rivalry that has come from it is just a burning hot topic for Rams fans consistently. And I felt like, how many times do you get to see your team go into your division rival stadium and beat them by 4 touchdowns in it while you continue to stay undefeated in a year that you definitely feel like you can go to the Super Bowl? Like, that's 2018. These are some of the pictures that you remember. It's just Todd Gurley breaking it to the outside. You remember the Corey Littleton blocked punt. Like, the similarities within the first and second game that we've chosen, Nick, Corey Littleton blocked a punt in both of those games, and that Wade Phillip defense was pretty damn good. But every other piece of detail from Sean McVay was spot on perfect. So
I think that's probably one of the reasons why I was pushing yellow for as long as I was, thinking that we were in a yellow jersey. Because if you look back during this 2017, 18, 19 era, when they wore the yellow jerseys outside the last time they ever wore them against the Ravens, they, like, every single game was like incredible. It was like they put on the yellow jerseys and they are like putting up 54 points against the Chiefs, like in like the greatest regular season game of all time. So, I mean, I just wanted a little taste of that. I always thought that was just like the coolest thing ever, those color rushes. But yeah, in the context of this game, I mean, this was back when the 49ers were kind of, trivial. They were in our rearview mirror. They were nothing to even think about being like this like difficult juggernaut yet. But it was still, a divisional opponent to go in there and, proceed to go 8-0. Like, that was, a true highlight whenever you can knock off a divisional opponent that, with that much vigor.
That's how I felt. I mean, when you look at the Vikings game, that game schematically was perfection. You look at the first 2 games of that 2018 season, you look at the Vegas game with Marcus Peters returning the pick and, doing everything that he does when he returns an interception for a touchdown. And then the following game, Nick, was an Arizona Cardinals blowout. It was 34-0. So those 2 games were very, very easy options, in my opinion, alongside of the Vikings game. But just because of the context and some of the things schematically that Sean McVay was doing over a 2-year period that still couldn't be figured out by somebody that had worked that closely with him for 5-6 years, it just didn't necessarily make sense to me. And plus, it's a time when San Francisco still had coaches like Rob Saleh. They still had D'Amico Ryans. D'Amico Ryans was the inside linebackers coach. He's now the head coach for the Houston Texans. Rob Saleh was the defensive coordinator. He's now coach for the New York Jets. Kyle Shanahan was still in place. George Lynch was still the general manager. So there is John Lynch, rather. There are still so many things about that defense. You still saw Jaquiski Tart and DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead and Fred Warner. Like, they still had a lot of pieces to that defense. And for it to be as unstoppable as it was in that period of time was, I just think, something that we should stop and re-admire when we have a chance.
Did Corey Littleton block a punt in 2017 against the Giants and 2018 against the Niners?
Yeah, he sure did. Corey Littleton was a weapon. He also had a sack early on in that game against C.J. Beathard. C.J. Beathard was running an offense that was producing more total yards than Jimmy Garoppolo at the time. So another reason why I picked this game was the offense was actually better week over week than they were when Jimmy Garoppolo was the starting quarterback. And I think he tore his ACL week 4 or week 5, which then brought in C.J. Beathard. And then the following year, Nick Mullins beat us. So, you got to kind of keep these things in consideration as to why a 39-10 game in division matters so much to stay undefeated.
I will say this about Kyle Shanahan. He does everything else so well with an organization, like everything. I mean, particularly like the running game, where the quarterback can hide behind a lot of things. So
more so than Sean McVay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. So, I mean, like Nick Mullins, Brock Purdy, Jimmy Garoppolo, like any of them, like he makes the offense very easy to like fill out if you're a quarterback. I mean, I'm hearing that the Niners want to go with Brock Purdy as their number one, even though they got Sam Darnold. So
yeah, I think it's the stubbornness of Kyle Shanahan that's going to end up getting in their way, because if they don't win a Super Bowl, he's going to be consistently doing paralysis by analysis. He's going to consistently over-engineer his offense to a point where he's going to continue to frustrate himself. And then I don't know how long it's going to take him to realize if he just had a quarterback of a higher caliber, he would go ahead and win the Super Bowl pretty easily.
I think here's my thought process, and maybe it's just in the front of my mind because of the Netflix documentary. I think the Vikings move off of Kirk Cousins end of this year if they don't make a deep playoff run. And I think the Niners swoop in, pick up Kirk Cousins, and win a Super Bowl.
I don't know if Kirk Cousins could win a Super Bowl, but if there's a single offense and coach,
if there's a team where he can,
yeah, it would be that. It would be them. Mm-hmm. Totally agree. It's a very, very good call out. And obviously, there's a relationship with Kirk and Mike and Sean and Kyle dating back to Washington when he was drafted in the 4th round behind Robert Griffin III. Such an interesting dynamic in that 2012 draft. So then moving on to 2019, Nick, this is where the conversation gets really interesting, right? Because we all knew what the offense was in the first 2 years. It was 11 personnel. It was a lot of play action, a lot of boot, a lot of motion at the line of scrimmage, the outside zone run scheme. But this is where the offense had to really kind of take a deep dive and redevelop itself. And McVay had to kind of start reevaluating what it was that he was bringing to the table, because obviously we know what happened with the 6-1 fronts in 2018 and how we talked about this before the podcast started. It was really Matt Patricia who introduced it with the Detroit Lions. It was like week 12, week 13. Then we saw Vic Fangio introduce it again, bring it to the table and dominate us. I think it was week 14 in freezing cold Chicago weather in December, January. And then the Patriots, no other team picked up on it from that 4 or 5 week stretch. The Patriots picked up on it for the Super Bowl, which then made Sean McVay kind of reevaluate his whole future.
Took off several years of his life, probably.
Yeah. It's definitely a situation where you really have to kind of peel back the layers and see from a personnel perspective, how can I make this scheme better? There was a point in time in the 2019 season where I think we all doubted that could ever happen, because they were winning games earlier on in the season. I think they started 3-0, but there was a Browns game in week 3 specifically where I just felt like the offense wasn't firing on all cylinders and couldn't move the ball as efficiently as they normally would. So in 2019, Nick, this was week 13. I want to say it was a color rush game, but I don't have the photos. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I do. So it wasn't
against the Ravens.
The color rush game was against the Ravens. So this is what we're looking at from this game. It was week 13 of 2019. The Rams are coming off of a really tough loss against the Baltimore Ravens. So the week before, they were wearing the color rush jerseys. They lost that game 45-6, where the Ravens rushed for 285 yards in a time where the Rams defense was only allowing like 85 yards on the ground per game, and a season in totality that was really, really challenging. We talked about coming off of the Super Bowl loss. We were only 6-5 at that point. Like you thought they would be much worse coming off of a Super Bowl loss, and considering the loss of personnel, Todd Gurley, all of the drama that was happening in 19, you're still fighting for a spot in the playoffs. The Ravens, though, what they did was they used a ton of motion at the snap in 2019. They were the first in the NFL at 34% in 2019 specifically, and the Rams are only at 18%, which was 4th amongst all teams, but it was trending upwards. So McVay saw that as an opportunity, and what he did to their own defense in that game was he immediately started incorporating more of that motion as the season progressed into 2020. And what I thought was really, really most impressive about the commitment to this in a post-Todd Gurley era was if they had known about some of the effectiveness and some of the efficiency behind creating more motion at the line of scrimmage and creating a little bit more complex of a run scheme, perhaps the year prior, 2018, would have ended differently. And it all makes a little bit of a difference if you have a quarterback who's mobile, can run the pistol, but going up against heavy fronts and loaded boxes, it's a really good way to be able to stretch your offense and make the defense defend every single blade of grass. And their rushing totals, if you look at the Rams' rushing totals late in 2019 and early in 2020, and again late in 2020, which is another thing that we'll call out, it was because McVay tweaked, an emphasis on tweaked, because it was primarily out of the same personnel groupings, but he tweaked the scheme. And in this game, this Cardinals game, in the very first series, you saw a ton of pre-snap movement, late lead blocks. One of the late lead blockers that was coming around in a pull was Josh Reynolds, of all people. Goff was rolling out in play action in the boot game. He was under center. He was in shotgun. There was a variety of concepts on display, and you never knew which one was coming at you. And this is coming off of a 45-6 loss where we felt like the season was entirely over.
Yeah.
And to me, Nick, I felt like this was the beginning of Sean McVay's offensive remodel. I'm not using the word rebuild. I'm using remodel specifically for a reason. Obviously, coming out of 2018, Nick, there was a ton of emphasis on how they're going to handle that 6-1 front. But there's two ways to combat that. It's empty sets, which McVay will go on to discover with Matthew Stafford, which he eventually wanted to run with Stafford, but couldn't run with Jared Goff. And when there's too many weapons flying around, but that too high shell, that's when the empty sets can exploit that. But when you don't feel overly confident Jared Goff can do that consistently, then you trade for Matthew Stafford. And then also the pre-snap motion. That's another way to get that 6-1 front off their spots. You get their first and second level defenders flowing in a direction, in a zone, in a run scheme, to just combat them eventually with an inside cutback or a jet sweep around the opposite direction, which most quarterbacks can run, but Jared Goff in that period of time ran exceptionally well. But anyway, this game was... Sorry for the tangent. This game was 34-0 late in the fourth quarter until Kyler Murray scrambled for a late garbage time touchdown. But just domination in all phases. And it was the quick adjustment to me that led to me bringing this game back up.
Yeah. I mean, Goff, that game, he always plays exceptional in Arizona. I'm not sure he's lost in Arizona throughout his entire span of his career. Threw 424 yards, no turnovers, only sacked once. In a season where the defense had given up like 40-plus points and only like 9 wins, it didn't end up being enough to get into the playoffs, as we remember. But McVay was, still cooking up something special. And after a Super Bowl visit, especially from like such a young team like that, like expect a similar thing to happen to the Eagles this year. My thoughts, because the Rams schedule that year was really brutal. They were playing a lot of really good teams. I mean, they faced Lamar in his MVP season, like at home in those color rush jerseys the week prior, where it was, he was playing lights out that entire season. So it was really, really difficult. But, I remember thinking at the end of 2019, like, oh no, like we'll never win a Super Bowl now. And then I started buying like old Super Bowl merch because I really wanted to buy like Super Bowl merch. So I had like a 2000s like pullover, from the 2000 season pullover that said like Rams Super Bowl champs, because I was just like, I don't know if they have what it takes anymore. Like the window's kind of closed. And then, move on to 2020 where they miraculously kind of finish 10-6 because Brandon Staley's defense kind of like awakened something new. But if you watch this,
Vic Fangio, right? It's Vic Fangio's scheme
that
Brandon Staley added his own layer to.
Stanley from Fangio, where McVay was like, I need to bring in some of this, like this iron to help sharpen my iron. But yeah, I mean, that was a really weird season. And I remember trying to convince myself that they could do it that year. And it was all like, it was the COVID season. There was nobody in the stands. But they started out that season really hot.
Yeah, they did.
They beat the Cowboys, and then they beat the Eagles. And they like the Tyler Higbee Eagles game that we'll never stop talking about until his career's over, where he was like 4 touchdowns, 3 to 4 touchdowns.
I think he had 3 before the halftime was over.
Yeah, I mean, and Goff was also playing like lights out. I remember being like, guys, it's over. The Goff Wentz debate. Goff is the winner, which I was right. I mean, I still want my flowers for being right.
You're so right. No, that debate is always correct. And you know what? I think going back to what you said about the Super Bowl merch and going back and buying stuff and kind of reliving that era, I want to say that there were moments where I felt like that, but there were so many other moments, whether it was, because the McVay journey has been a roller coaster thus far. One week you feel like, you're seeing the next iteration of offense in the NFL. And the week after that, you feel like he doesn't even know which play he's going to call. But for this specifically, like I had confidence because of games like this, because the scheme was tinkered with, because they utilized more motion, right? Because they changed the run scheme. Instead of cutting outside, you cut inside. Instead of a zone scheme that's flowing left, you jet sweep and bring it around the right edge. Like there's so many different pieces that you can play around with. Like in 2020, this game that we're going to talk about, like that's when you saw the introduction of the I formation and Gerald Everett getting down and starting to lead block a little bit. And then you see it again with Ben Skoranek last year, because it's kind of like a desperation. Let's kind of get the wheels spinning with the offense in the run game.
Yeah, and some way possible.
Yeah, they were really coming. The 2020 season was so interesting because it is obviously the COVID season. And we know how the season ended, right? It was with Jared Goff's thumb and the John Wolford drama. They lost to Buffalo earlier on in a heartbreaker. But if they would have won that game, everybody would have been considering them to be Super Bowl contenders again. And then there was the Miami game where I think Jared Goff had 4 turnovers, which was one of the moments.
That was the end of the Goff era.
I thought so too.
Was that Miami game is where I remember you came to me because I couldn't watch. I was on the road for work. And I was like, why is everybody freaking out? It seems like they can still win this game. And you were like, you're not seeing the performance. You're not visualizing how bad Jared Goff is playing today.
It was the worst thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It was.
And then that's when everybody was like, Wolford should start, like you have to bench Goff, like all this stuff. And I remember I was just like, okay, that's lunacy. So
yeah, no, but it was kind of like a desperation take, right? Because there was no other opportunity to potentially put somebody else in that spot and still continue to win games, because Goff was the next week, Nick, after that game that we were just talking about against Miami, I'm pretty sure he dominated the Arizona Cardinals.
He did. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they beat the Cardinals by like 35 points, and Jared Goff looked perfect.
Yeah, and they were like huge underdogs in that game too. I remember because I bet on them, and I was
the Cardinals.
I was like, it's the Rams in Arizona. They'll be fine.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was the year that Arizona was half decent, but regardless, it was they were coming off of a stretch. They won 3 of their last 4 games before they had to face Bill Belichick and the Patriots, who were 500 at the time, led by Cam Newton in this 2020 game specifically. But this is the only photo you really need to see. This is it. We don't have to talk about the game.
I thought you were gonna show the photo of Goff diving over. Yeah, no. He hasn't.
I got you.
That's my recollection of that game. I remember he threw like a terrible pick at like the 5-yard line, and then Cam was like, I'll do you one better. And then threw a terrible pick, and the Rams scored a touchdown. That's
right. I just love when the offensive line and the run game comes prepared to kick.
I really do think, and this is crazy, and it could have changed the entire course of history, but it probably absolutely would have. I think with a healthy Aaron Donald, the Rams win in Green Bay. Then they beat Tom Brady again at home at the NFC Championship, and they go to that Super Bowl because they were in the playoffs. They had something that nobody else, their defense was amazing. They were the best defense that year, and defense wins championships. What won us? I mean, outside of Stafford and Kupp on that final drive, it's the defense holding the Bengals pretty much to no touchdowns outside of a ridiculous face mask the entire second half. So,
that's the difference. It's a defensive play down the stretch, but how consistent can your defense play throughout the entire year, and how can your offense stay efficient enough to keep your defense off the field to the point where it doesn't hurt them late in games? Yeah. And you saw that late in that 2020 season. You saw a couple of moments late in that 2020 season where the offense just couldn't get going, and Jared Goff had hurt his thumb, and then they had to beat the Cardinals 18-7. To secure the 4th spot in the playoffs, to then go beat Seattle in Seattle to get through the wild card round, and then go see the Packers. So
they had an uphill battle, but they totally, that Packers game. I remember some really it was the I formation. What was it? Cam Akers 2-point conversion or something like that.
They ran a wildcat play. It was a direct snap.
Yeah,
Direct snap to Cam Akers. Yep.
yeah.
Mhm.
There was, that 2020 season was wild for so many different
And
reasons.
in this game specifically against Bill Belichick, Akers was I think he set the record. His biggest rushing game by an NFL rookie in the 2020 season. It was just the 9th time in NFL history that a running back had gone for over 150 yards against a Bill Belichick coach defense since 2020. So that's scheme, that's blocking, that's execution. That's how you play football. When you're forced to become one dimensional and you have one hand tied behind your back, that's how you kick some ass on the road. So,
yeah.
And then you go into the 2021 season, and this is the only picture that you have to show.
Yeah, week 1 against the Bears.
Week 1 against the Bears.
You weren't there. You were flying to your honeymoon. I was home. I was in Jersey because of your wedding. And I remember I stayed an extra day so I could watch it with our dad. And I'm like freaking out at the start of the game. I'm like, oh man, like I don't know. I don't think it's very good. After the first touchdown, our dad turns to me and he goes, the Rams could win the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, and Van Jefferson. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, after the Van Jefferson touchdown, it's the first thing he said to me. And I was like, whoa. I was still not sure about Stafford. It kind of took me a whole season, but I got there by the post.
The problem was, and the reason why you didn't fully come around on Stafford in the first 2 months of the season was because the November happened. Exactly. The whole month of November.
Oh my God!
When you were on the radio talking about how Matthew Stafford is the truth, he's the guy we want to go into the doghouse with. We're going to win the Super Bowl with him. And then Derrick Henry and Jeffrey Simmons and everybody else runs all over us in that game against the Titans. And it started a really difficult November. But that first game of the season specifically, I think we all knew that there was a chance that the Rams were going to win the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah. Matthew Stafford is the real deal. Ryan Tannehill is a subpar quarterback.
Hey, I guess who has the higher rating in Madden this year?
Tannehill?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Stafford was injured. Also, what? I mean, our account, the Rams brothers, tweeted out the ESPN's rankings of quarterbacks, and Stafford's not even in the top 20.
No, that's the Madden rankings.
Madden rankings. Wow. Also, this is really funny. You guys can't see this, but Dean has it all written out of McVay's perfect games. And then it says 2022, none.
Well, because what was there last year? Maybe you can call one of the Baker Mayfield games perfect.
No.
Later on in the season.
Oh, wait, no. 2022, Christmas Day, Broncos.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I needed some help with that one because I was out of gas after I did the first 5 seasons.
That truly was a perfect game.
It was.
I mean,
it was another great example of Cam Akers and the defense and just everything firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, totally agree. What else do we have for camp? Nick, we got camp in 4 days.
Yeah, camp.
Who are we looking at? You're looking at Brian Allen. You're looking at Joe Noteboom. I guess it's really the entire offensive line. Maybe a couple of receivers.
If you're going to view, I would say you're looking 100% at Stafford, seeing how he's looking, and then just rookie mania. You know what I mean? Just guys you can't really name, people that are making big plays, and you're like, oh, who was that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who's stepping up right now?
Yeah, you want to see that along the defensive line. You want to see that along the front. You want to see Ernest Jones take that step into a leadership role. You want to see Jordan Fuller play a full healthy season. You want to see Kobe Durant transform into an all-pro. Yeah. I like the one thing that I saw that Kevin Demoss said that I just want to reiterate was that nobody really has a starting job. Unless you're Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, or Aaron Donald, aka one of the weight-bearing walls. Nobody else has a definitive role set aside for them in this offense or this defense. Arguably, you could say Rob Havenstein is the starting right tackle and Kobe Durant is the starting outside corner. Maybe he plays the Joker at the star. But, there's so many moving pieces with this season, and that's why this training camp. And then you obviously have the preseason where you have 3 games specifically where all those rookies led by Stetson Bennett are going to be playing. And then you have the two scrimmages against the Broncos and the Raiders.
I think
you'll see a
I
lot
think
of
the
starters.
Rams should legitimately win preseason games this year.
I do too.
Because you're playing people like Stenson Bennett is not Wolford or Bryce Hopkins. Like he should have something to be playing for in those games.
Right.
So
no, I agree. Yeah,
I'll probably go to maybe I'll hit up Ryan and see if he's going to go to Rams Chargers.
You should. Yeah, I think that would be a good one to go to. This is going to be another year. It's a fun preseason where the offense continues to evolve, where the defense, what is it going to look like? Is it going to be a carbon copy of what we saw with Brandon Staley and Raheem Morris's versioning 2.0 of that in 2022? Like how much of that carries over into 2023? The losses of Jalen Ramsey and Bobby Wagner, how does that change your looks schematically? How does it change the matchup specifically that the offense is going to look to get? And then offensively, in 2022, we saw a ton of empty, or 2021 rather, and in 2022 early, the offense was primarily set, say probably 65, 70% of the offense out of empty. So the reason why that they run that offense is so that the defense can identify themselves. When you have 5 offensive players split wide, the defense has to defend every single blade of grass, and it forces them to show their hand. So you mix that in with a couple of things under center. You could still mix in the play action boot game. You could still mix in the jet sweeps. You could still mix in the backside screens to your running backs. As long as you have layers upon layers upon layers built into this offense, then they will be successful in 2023. And I have no reason to see why they couldn't win 9-10 games and get themselves back into the playoffs. It's just the illusion of complexity. It is marrying the run and the pass. It is everything foundationally that Sean McVay has wanted to instill. And I think that it's been the perfect 6-year mark, probably the most expedited learning process of any head coach in the history of the NFL, to where now he could bring all of these things to the table and execute.
Yeah.
So
one last time, I want to give a shout out to Jourdan Rodrigue. That podcast is the Playcallers is amazing. I love to hear about the Piss Brothers, as they call themselves, or Piss Boys. Piss Brothers just makes me think of Succession, the disgusting brothers. But yeah, thank you, Jourdan. Thank you, Netflix, for making amazing football content. I'm not going to say HBO because Hard Knocks usually sucks. It'll probably be fun this year because of Rodgers, but whatever. I'm waiting all month for Sunday night.
I'll tell you what, after I watched the quarterback documentary, I'd much rather watch Kirk Cousins and his journey through life and his rehabilitation process and the way that he goes about his business daily from a man to another man that's a little bit more relatable. I'd rather watch him over Aaron Rodgers.
Same. I think Kirk Cousins is Jim Halpert, minus 5 points charisma plus 100 points athleticism. And then his wife is Pam. Plus minus nothing.
That's what Darius said too. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah. Also, I love the Netflix documentary because it got my girlfriend interested into she's like, are we gonna be Vikings fans next year? Because she loves Kirk Cousins, and I was like,
so do I.
I know, me too. And I was like, I love the Vikings as I have a lot of really good friends that are huge Vikings fans, so I usually just keep up with them just to keep up with them. And now, she's going to be more excited to watch Viking games than Rams.
And it goes back to Sean McVay is one of the reasons why Kirk Cousins is what he is today. So it's all.
Wait. Here's an exercise. I want you to ask this to Daria for context. That's Dean's wife. What if she could name 3? Because Danielle couldn't name 3. But ask her what quarterback she would want to see on the next season.
Okay.
Danielle said,
"Sounds good."
She said Jared Goff, and I said thank you. And then she said Jalen Hurts.
Oh.
And then she was like, that's it.
I could tell you who she would choose. Joe Burrow, Matthew Stafford, and then maybe Jared.
I was like, what, you don't want to watch Stafford? And she was like, no.
Yeah. Well, she was there with me at the Super Bowl, so she understands the complexities and love and everything that's intertwined with Joe Burrow and Joe Burr and Cincinnati and all that.
Joe Burr, I think if you want to follow the top tier, mid tier potential backup, I would go Burrow, Goff, I guess, as mid tier, and then Geno Smith maybe.
Yeah, great. Sold. So
Yeah, I think people would love that.
well done. Thank you guys.
Or Brock Purdy. I take out. Yeah,
You could
take
do that.
out. Yeah, I think there's more of a story with Brock. Maybe.
I'm good with that. Good with that.
No, Darnold. Final answer, Darnold.
Done.
Answer, Darnold.
All
Yeah.
right, done. Deal. Because I can't stand the 49ers, but I do like Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for listening. You guys are the best. Training camp's coming up. Season's coming up. Stay with us. We love you guys. Like and subscribe. We're almost at 1K. We just need a couple more of you guys to subscribe to get us to 1K. And then we're off and running for the season. So thank you guys so much for listening.
Almost have 1K in my bank account. Pray for me during the writer and actor strike. Love you. Bye.
Pray for Nick. #. Peace.